wants to moderate?
Or perhaps Dylan or Andrew?
Yeah, if you want to moderate, yeah. I'm happy to answer any questions.
I don't think we have microphones lined up, but if you want to just stand up, maybe put your hand up.
Yeah, absolutely, you can just put your hand up. It'll be different than last time where we sort of kind of.
You just pick anyone, I'll let you. I don't want anyone to think I'm biased.
What about the idea of having different schools for boys and girls?
I would hope we wouldn't have to do that, because I think there's a lot to be said for educating children together. However, it's possible that in the short term we have to look at things like that. So my answer is, there's a lot to be said for it. There's a lot to be said for it. I would hope that it wouldn't be deemed as a long-term solution. But we need to do something, and we need to do it now, because we're not going to see results in 15 years or 20 years. So there's a lot to be said for boys educated. That incidentally, in the UK, that was common in secondary schools. Since they've abandoned that, and I'm not saying that's why, but since they've abandoned that, boys have gone into double. So there is something to say for
In the beginning, you had mentioned that there's a steady decrease in the number of male students going into the elementary school division. I'm just curious, do you think that might be in part attributed to the fact that there's this common perception within society that, especially when it comes to, I hate to talk about this, but like when it comes to sexual crimes committed against children, there's the myth that it's always men, the male sexual predator. Do you think maybe there's a fear amongst men that they don't want to go into that profession because it's too risky? They just don't know when they're going to come in on, like they're just going to meet someone on a bad hair day and it's like, oh my God, you're getting too close to my kid, that type of thing.
Yes, that's part of it. There's no question that that's part of it. You want to know another part of it? Another part of it is, in days gone by, we had teacher shortages. So if you went into teacher training, pretty good chance you get a job. Now we have a teacher surplus. If you go into teacher training, pretty good chance you're going to end up on supply, maybe working 1 or 2 days a week. In our societal values, I'm not saying this is the way it should be, but in our societal values, if you only go to work 1 or 2 days a week and your wife or girlfriend goes every day, you have to live with the fact that you're only working 1 or 2 days a week. If the roles were reversed,
it's okay.
it's not nearly, the social pressure is not nearly as great. So men are unlikely to go into professions where they're not going to find work. But here's one for you. The most male-dominated profession that existed was veterinary medicine. Almost everybody in the veterinary schools now is a woman. And as the number of women in the veterinary school increases, the number of male applicants decreases. Because men generally don't tend to go into professions that are seen as female dominated. In the UK, lots of male nurses, all kinds of them. Rare here. I'm not saying it's good, I'm just saying it's rare. And you run the risk of people saying you're some kind of predator or you're here for, you obviously are. And so people are very conscious of that.
Yes.
Thank you very much. This is great this evening. Everything you've told me has been a reaffirmation of the things I've learned. I'm in the trenches with my son, and from JK on till now. He's in grade, and he's in grade 1. And but what has caught me the most is that they're boys. Which I have twins, a boy and a girl. What's caught me the most is that I think boys mature slower. And I don't think this at all is acknowledged by the education standards. They take longer to get where they're going. It's just, they're different. Boys and girls are different. And the other thing that I fought with, from JK, SK to 1, is the fact that there's no way to change the system. I have fought so hard. I've sat every Thursday for an hour in an a JK class. And I've seen it. All the boys were coming up to me. They were so happy to see me in that room for that 1 hour. There's no way to change this. You've got the teachers, you've got the principals, you've got this. I've talked to many superintendents of education now. I switched schools. I finally gave up on public education and I went to Waldorf. And I'm now getting a little calmer.
The point you make, I teach vocal music in my local elementary school. Kids love it. I'm not, that's not me patting myself on the back, it's just I'm different. So, in more ways than one, I guess. But I'm a male, and they don't see me. And the little boys gravitate to it. And I think that's okay. I mean, nothing wrong with that.
The gentleman in the
Yes,
blue.
I think maybe part of the paradigm shift that you're talking about is not only and it has to do with gender, but I've often thought that we have to see early education, including parental interaction with children, as well as public school, I mean elementary grades, as far more important than high school or university. But the thing is, we're sophisticated beings. It's similar to the feelings I get when certain people talk about war. It's very exciting, it's very sophisticated international relations. But really the most important things in life, you realize as you grow older, are the micro, banal interactions that we have with each other and our children every single day. But we don't value them. And the other thing I want to say is because I'm writing about Darwin and Freud, and they're latterly discovered about human beings as species. I mean, we've always known we're a species, but if you look at other species and how they teach their children, it's like, the first 3 days out of the nest. A week, or with elephants, it's longer because elephants have a mentality of 7 or 8 year old, I believe, or something. Who knows what they have? Great memories, but as a species, we fail in honoring ourselves as a species. I know it's more complicated, I'm doing the reduction thing. We fail to honor ourselves as a species by, for instance, when I talk to my cousin, who's a grade 1 teacher, and she's a French immersion grade 1 teacher, and I see her all the time, and she poo-poos what she does, because she says, oh, but you're a high school teacher. I've been high school, and I question her, and I value what she does, and I tell her, and she's so shocked. This is the opposite of the way it should be. We need to value early kids' education. Now, I know many of the reasons why we don't, because parents are so narcissistic, and it's the same thing when the way we treated Victorian children as young adults. We have a similar thing now. We don't really value how intelligent a 6-year-old baby is, and they're looking around and seeing everything. Okay, I'm done. That's
No, excellent point, and really excellent point. And it, of course, it agrees with my statement, and that is the evidence shows that, the long-term, the number one long-term predictor of how you're going to do is what's happened in the first number of years of your life. And the kids that do best are the ones who have more interactions with the parents, talking to them and listening to them and so on. Not being spoken to, but spoken with. And the evidence is suggesting, this is very, very recent research, the evidence is suggesting that may be the number one factor. And it's exactly what I believe, what you're talking about.
Yes.
Enjoyed the talk, Dr. Bennett. Thank you very much. My question, you mentioned a lot about unintended consequences and unintended bias by
Yeah.
teachers in the education system. I'm just wondering, at what point does that bias turn into this abject refusal to acknowledge on a systematic level that there really is a serious problem there? Because I find it somewhat incongruous that so many people can say, no, there is no problem, there is no problem, there is no problem, and be unaware that they're contributing to that problem on a daily basis.
Okay, part of the issue is I very seldom say I think. I'm going to say I think. I think part of the issue is, I spent all these years as a teacher. So and this is a joke for me. I was 24 years old. I'd been teaching for a number of years at that point. And secondary school parents were coming in to talk to me, who were considerably older than I was. Because I was a whole lot older than my students. And they were deferring to me as if I knew something. And you know, that really goes to your head in a hurry. I know about these things. I am a teacher. I have whole months of training. But the parents were deferring to me. Parents who made more money than I did, and you name it. And they were deferring to me like I was some kind of expert. Hard to deal with that. But also because, you know, one of the realities is, one of the highest, if you talk about the top 5% of wage earners in the country, if you were a teacher with teacher training, 10 years experience, you're in that 5%. Nothing like that to make you feel important, besides all the other perks that go with it. So, you know, it's, you know, I mean, you honestly expect the director to say, we were wrong?
Honestly?
Yes.
Oh, no, sure.
Boy, are you ever naive.
I'm young. I'm only
Yeah, I know, I can see that.
Yeah, quite young.
No. The reality is it's very, very difficult to say. But for one thing, if you say publicly, we messed up, you run the risk, honestly, you run the risk of getting sued for educational malpractice.
Oh.
No, that's absolutely,
Sued by who?
All of us.
all kinds of parents. All kinds of parents. There was a suggestion in the U.S. a few years ago that, in fact, school systems were going to be sued for educational malpractice. Let that happen once, and you're going to see a whole lot. You're going to see the dam break in terms of people saying, my kid's in this condition, and I have evidence that suggests that this is part of the reason for it. So they're not going to readily do that. They're not going to. But the other thing is, hey, why would they listen to me? I'm an old has-been. I haven't been in a classroom in how long? How long? You figure it's been since I've been in a classroom. So what would I know? I haven't been in a classroom in a week. But you say, look at me, and you think I've been in a classroom in 20 years. So that's part of the dilemma. Part of the dilemma is they're not going to listen to me. I don't have any title. I'm not director of anything anymore. I'm nobody. Look at the crowd in the room here. You were here for the last presentation. The room was full. I'm not much of a draw, am I? No, you know, like I've got to be humble about this. I'm not much of a draw.
It's also cold.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Don't back my big red.
Yeah, no, but the reality is, I mean, I'm here saying, you know, obviously, if I were a big draw, there'd be people who didn't get in like there were last time. So I'm not a big draw. And a lot of people don't want to hear what I have to say. Lots of people don't want to hear what I have to say.
Yeah, I have two girls and 3 boys. And what I noticed in the education system, it's very true what you say. I've noticed it firsthand. The girls would come back from school and they seem to, I don't want to sound sexist or anything like this, but I'm just saying reality of what I saw. And they would be content with school and they would mosey along. They wouldn't need that much assistance. But the boys, they need extensive, it's like teaching them. You have to teach them at home. They go to school, they come home, yeah, you do reading, you assist them with math, when they have the scissors, they're cutting something out, and they're pasting these things together with the parts of the flower, and it's, you have to constantly assist your boys with education. You assist the girls, you just don't need to at the same extent.
Okay.
I don't know, they go to the same school, they come back, this is what happens.
Couple of points on that. One of them is
So,
little girls, because of the activities our little girls engage in, and I say this with great caution, but anyway, a lot of the activities our little girls engage in are fine motor tasks.
Yeah.
And the activities we have our boys engage in are large motor activities. So I come home from work, on a rare occasion when I got home before dark, and you play basketball with your son in the driveway. You kick a soccer ball and you play ball hockey with your daughter. She's probably doing cutting out doll, they cut out doll figures and they fasten the dresses on them and so on. All of which are fine motor. When you get to school, there's no value placed on large motor. Lots on fine motor. So girls have that advantage. Now, I'm saying this with enormous caution because I said exactly this in Edmonton and got hammered for it. Absolutely got hammered for saying it. But it is a reality. So that's one set of factors that we do. Another set is that we raise our daughters, whether we know it or not, we raise our daughters to be compliant. And we raise our sons not to be compliant. Now you can disagree with me if you want, I don't mind, I don't care one way or the other. But the fact of the matter is, that's what happens. When you get to school, there's an enormous value placed on being compliant. And so if children come into school and you put on the whiteboard, the chalkboard, the smartboard, whatever, a series of nonsense syllables, ugh, and you tell them to memorize all these for tomorrow. Most of the girls will, and most of the boys won't.
I tend to agree. I can see that with the kids. They you know, there are different ages, of course, and they're all successful, but nonetheless, with the boys, it just seemed that there was extensive more hand-holding throughout the whole process.
Then, most of the girls will, most of the girls won't. Look at the school curriculum. I would argue that 50%, maybe more, is nonsense syllables. Sorry, I mean, if I'm boring you, I'm sorry. I said to my grade 12 history class, I stopped in the middle of a class, and I said, I don't know how you guys stand it. It was all boys. I don't know how you guys stand it. I'm boring even me. They sat there in shock. But you know what? I didn't say I'm boring even me. I said, this is boring even me. Everybody loosened up. But you know what? I thought, what in God's name are we learning this for? But who cares? It was like putting a lot of nonsense syllables on the board. But maybe you had a good teacher. I would argue that an awful lot of what we do in school is just equivalent to nonsense syllables. Well, if you're compliant, you do it, and you get rewarded. If you're not compliant, you don't get rewarded. And you turn off. I'm not going to do this. It's ridiculous. I'm not buying it. You're going to give me a mark for this? What do I care? You're going to put a sticker on my work? What do I care about stickers? I'd rather play.
I have an uncomfortable question to ask, but you're comfortable with uncomfortable things, I can tell. You've been talking about remedies of this being positive actions. And I have a negative action to ask you. I heard recently of a case, I think in London, where a 6 or 7-year-old boy was playing in the schoolyard with girls. And he pushed one of the girls on the chest down. And the teacher called his parents and said that he had sexually abused this other girl. 6 or 7 years old. And the framework for that is the emotional sensitivity that this teacher imposed on the girl. And she was right to have some framework for some kind of emotional sensitivity. So this entire talk that you've given us today, that I've learned a great deal, does that result in an abuse of a boy's emotional sensitivities, and should it be dealt with the way that the teacher incorrectly dealt with the case that I just
Well, number one, it's very hard for me to deal with that particular case.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that when children do things, it's probably very productive to talk to the children and find out where they're coming from with that.
I'm talking about holding the teacher accountable for not dealing with
Well-
the boys, not this case,
Yeah.
but in general,
Yeah.
boys in general.
Well, we should, but obviously this goes back to me saying we need to talk about gender sensitivity. 40 years ago, we needed to talk about men's gender sensitivity, men teachers, to the girls they were teaching. Now we probably need to be talking about female gender sensitivity to understand where boys are coming from, what they're bringing. And yes, people should be held accountable for incorrect actions. But you see, part of the dilemma is, okay, the teacher did this. I don't know whether the teacher went through the school principal or who the teacher went through. But you see, that's one of the issues. But when the whole school comes from a certain paradigm, it's really hard. And I'm not saying that because I think boys are totally different from girls. I don't think that. But the reality is that when you go into a situation and everybody has the same mindset and you don't fit, and that's one of the reasons somebody mentioned about men going into teaching. One of the reasons you don't go is you're right, that you're the only man on staff. You're the only one. You don't fit. You really don't fit. And if you think you do, think about it. You go in there, you don't fit. You can't. You don't take part in the conversations in the staff room. In fact, you stop going to the staff room because it's nothing to do with you. It's not your world. Is that the way it should be? No, of course not. Is that the way it is? Go and look. It is the way it is. So little boy behaves in a way that's probably inappropriate. Yeah, somebody should raise the issue. Of course, someone should raise the issue. Someone should call a local trustee or a school board official and say, "Could we kind of talk about this and find out whether this is appropriate or not?" In the broad sense. And I'm trying to raise the issue of saying we need to address it. And believe me, if we address it, you're looking at seeing the results 15 or 20 years ago. And that's one of the dilemmas we all deal with. We want a quick fix. So I talk to people in the school system that say, well, we're going to solve the problem of underachieving boys. We're going to have a staff meeting about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to spend a whole PA day talking about it. Or, quick fix, we'll put the grade 6 boys in one class and the grade 6 girls in another class for English. There aren't any quick fixes. You want to fix it? You're looking at a big problem, and you need to start now if you want to see results 15, 20 years from now. And that's part of the dilemma I think that you're raising.
If you do any questions.
Yes, Dr. Brown, you're lecturing on the structural frameworks of the educational system and what gaps or holes that boys fall into and whatnot. And you did use some examples about behavior. And I think that I would have liked to have heard a bit more as to how we socialize boys into patterns of behavior. So when I see a 4-year-old, 5-year-old boy running around, pushing boys, pushing girls over, and wrestling, and I see boys behaving more aggressively, that's a socialized behavior. The hormones haven't kicked in quite yet, have they? So, I can't accept the point boys will be boys. That's not an excuse. We teach boys, young boys, especially when we talk about 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, and they see patterns of behavior, whether it be, and mostly it's outside of the school, with the family, with the father, and the role that the father plays. So, I don't know, I think I would have liked to have heard more about the socialization. And I mean, one of the examples that you used about dad sitting there with the Harley magazine or the Sports Illustrated son, trying to mimic that kind of behavior. Well, why the Sports Illustrated? Why the football magazine? Why not, a magazine on science or technology or whatever?
I only threw that as an example, and I used Hot Rod magazine, but I only threw that out as an example of saying it doesn't have to be a novel. And I said that because last week when I presented, I had a mother say, my husband doesn't read. And what she meant was, my husband doesn't read novels. And when we talked a little bit, she said, well, he reads the newspaper, and he reads magazines, and he reads technical literature and so on. That's reading. She said, oh, well, I'm glad you told me that, because now I won't go home and tell mom. But you see, that's why I use that example. And I understand this is a socialization issue. There's no question in my mind, socialization. None. And I don't think we should be saying, hence, your little boy can do whatever you want. I'm not saying that either. And I'm not saying we need to raise our boys to be like that. But the fact of the matter is the kids that are getting, a lot of boys that are getting trampled here, it's not because their behavior is that aggressive. It's not, I might add, there's a study, a major study, where little boys went into preschool, and girls and boys behaved in much the same manner, and the boys were constantly corrected for their aggressive behavior. A year later, the boys were aggressive. So, if you want to read the details of it in my book, I can't remember the rest off the top of my head. So the point is, yes, we are doing this to our boys, but the system's doing it as well. And as a parent, I need to be modeling the kind of behavior that I want my child to engage in. So, you know, if I worked in the UK and I worked with a group of kids working with a group of kids who were school phobic, and so they'd come in, and I'd work with them in the morning, and the kids would come in, and they could not give me one sentence without a 4-letter word in it. And I was quite upset by it, until I realized that was the common speech pattern in that particular area. I won't give you all the details of how I found it out. But it was the common speech pattern. So the kids weren't, they didn't mean, it wasn't aimed at me, didn't mean anything by it. But you know what? In the bigger social context, those kids going to find jobs and so on, if they're going to use 4-letter words in every sentence, they're not going to have the really high-paying professional jobs. That's not acceptable. So we need to be looking at that socialization factor. I agree. I couldn't agree more. I'm really big on the socialization issue. And I'm also not saying boys will be boys and can do whatever they want. I'm not saying that at all. But when a male teacher looks at an activity and doesn't see anything wrong with it, and a female teacher punishes the child, then we need to talk about this.
I don't see male or female, I see two teachers, to be honest.
Well, except that we had the children, the study we did was we had children and we recorded how many children were sent to the office for negative discipline and how many were sent for positive. And almost all the kids that were sent for, well, not almost, all the kids were sent for negative were boys, and all the ones sent for positive were girls, and all the ones sent for negative were sent by the female teachers. All of them. I hadn't expected that, but that's what came out of it. All of them. The male teachers weren't sending the kids, they thought it was normal. The female teachers said it's not normal, it's not acceptable, and they were sending them. So you need to talk. I don't mean fire a bunch of teachers or whatever, but boy, we better come to an agreement as to what we consider to be normal, acceptable behavior. And when every, I mean, that's in my book too, it's in that study, but when every single kid who was sent, every one for negative was a boy and all sent by women teachers, we're looking at a bit of a problem here, I think. I'm going to lose the whole crowd drifting away here, but anyway.
I was wondering how much you figure the necessity for a dual income family has contributed to this crisis we see in education system nowadays.
Well, let me put it this way: a third of children grow up in single-parent families. And in the UK, one of their studies was around the whole issue of the fact that parents have very little time now to spend with their children compared to what they had a generation ago. Because, number one, both parents are working, which is a fair game. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't, but the fact of the matter is they now have less time to spend with their children. And the second one I'll give you is, it's not too long ago that your children went to the playground and played baseball or whatever. Now we drive them everywhere. And so the time I'm spending driving my daughter to baseball instead of her walking to baseball is now time I don't have. You know, I drive her over, I wait, I drive her back. It's time I don't have to spend with the other children in the family to do the things they're doing. Now you can say to me, oh, well, the kids need it for safety. Well, the studies are, and there have been a number of them, the child is safer walking than they are riding in your car. The probability of your child being hurt walking to school, walking wherever, is less than the probability of being hurt riding in your car. But in my day, a kid walking to school, you were a bad parent. Now your child walks to the activities, you're a bad parent. You're a bad parent. You're letting your child walk to school? You're letting your child walk to hockey practice? My God, it's 4 blocks and he's only 16.
I'll feel both ways.
Yeah, no, that's my day. That was my day. Yeah, it was my day. 5 miles each way, uphill both ways. Carried my shoes so they wouldn't get wet.
Yes. Addressing the 60s, how resistant were the predominant teachers, administrators of the education system to the forthcoming paradigm shift focusing on girls and education? How long did the resistance last? How quickly did they acquiesce to this, get the job of doing this? Relative to what's going on right now, what you seem to be addressing is this monolithic juggernaut
Yeah.
that has a vested interest in no change, and it almost sounds like lawyers in family law. They have no interest in changing the system. So I'm very curious as to that time period, how quickly you were able to implement educational change.
I did what I did because I believed it. Okay? Some of the people did what they did because the directors were all called in and were told by the deputy minister, you will comply or the minister will cancel your certificate. No. Didn't make helping difference. And he asked them to do it anyway. But when you get called in and you're told you hold your certification at the pleasure of the minister, and if your certification is canceled, you are instantly out of work. Not you're out of work 2 months from now. You're instantly out of work because you have to be qualified. You're instantly out of work. When you get that statement made to you, it's amazing how fast people comply.
I think fear was part of that implementation.
Oh, of course. You think that all these guys were buying into the whole idea of girls needing more girls and so on? I was buying into it because of my educational background and my experiences, my life experiences and my children and a whole pile of other things I've dealt with. Others were buying into it because there was a gun to their head.
So we'd be saying less than a year.
Oh, I would say probably took 4 or 5 years before you got heavy-duty implementation. But when you sit in a room on an examining committee, and the ministry representative, the woman as it turns out, comes in and says, we're not discussing this. If it's a female applicant, she automatically passes. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to say, well, this one's hopeless. I'm not passing her. Doesn't matter what you say. She's already passed. How long does that take to change? Well, you want paradigm shift? It's done. It's done. It's done. That's it. So you can do it, but you have to have the powers that be want to do it. And this goes back to your family court law and so on. When the government of the day wants it to happen, it'll happen. But in the meantime, what we've been talking about is what can we do? Because if we're waiting around for the government to do it, it'll be catastrophic because it takes 15 years to see the effects of that. It took that long for the effects of women teachers on little girls. It took that long. We're feeling the effects now from what was done in the 1980s. And don't misunderstand, I was never embarrassed about, and I'm not embarrassed now, about what we did. What we did was right for children. Now what we need to do now is what's right for children, not what's right for unions. So, sorry, I used to be union president. Not what's right for the established order and so on. We need to do what's right for children. These are well, in my case, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. I have to be concerned about those. What kind of a parent am I? I don't care. So I have to deal with these issues, and so I'm talking to anyone who listen to me. And do I think it's going to change overnight? No. But you know what? If we all walk out of here and go, oh, that was an interesting talk, or that was a terrible talk, or whatever, and do nothing, then we might have all, as well all stayed home. I mean, I don't know what we missed on television today, but we might as well stay home like TV. Or stay home and read to our sons. The reality is we got to come out of here and do something. And hopefully I've given you some ideas of things you can do. Not the least of which, and this is not a big promotion on my part, because I have no vested interest in this at all, but not the least of which is to take a look at something like a center for men and families. See, because I grew up with, not I grew up with, as an adult, I dealt with a shift from women's centers to centers for women and their children. That language shift was monumental. Are you telling me my son's not my son? He's just his mother's son? You telling me my daughter's not my daughter, not my child? Women and their children. Neatly excluding all men. And that's a one-word change. But the message is monumental. Well, how does that make you feel as a dad? And if you haven't even noticed, start noticing, because there's a major one. So when we talk about Center for Men and Families, I would have liked to have said, somebody asked me, but anyway, I would have liked to have said, men and their families. Yeah, men and their children. Because the fact of the matter is, these are my children too. But I have been neatly sidetracked. Now, I'm not saying I personally have, because I haven't been, but that terminology does that. One word, and most people didn't even notice. In fact, there's probably some people in the room who didn't notice. But you better notice.
So way in the corner. No, that'll be you again.
Yeah. Do you have hard data that the number, just the sheer number of male teachers in a school is positively correlated with the grades how boys do in that school?
Yes. There are all kinds of studies on it. There are all kinds of studies on it. And they're in my book. But if you just go online, you'll find.
So why is it so hard to implement? I mean, if you had the data, you wouldn't be having to do this campaign. You would just give them the data and
give them. Okay. You go into a situation where the government of the day right now has said that if you apply for a teaching position, a school is required to look at 5 teachers who have the greatest seniority on the supply list. I guarantee you, all 5 of those will be women. I guarantee it, all 5 will be women. Now, why did they do that when it's bad for boys? Because it's good for the union. I'm sorry, that's what the union wanted.
Do they know
so they
it's
did
bad
it.
for boys?
Pardon?
Do they know it's bad for boys?
Sure they do. Of course they do. But what they know is that they need that particular union group to support them in the coming election. I'm sorry, that's a reality. That's a reality. But you take a look. I guarantee you the 5 longest serving people will be women. The other thing is, why are they the longest serving people on supply? And I'm not picking on them because they're women, so don't misunderstand. Why are they the longest serving ones in supply? Why haven't they been hired previously? Draw your own conclusion.
No, I'm questioning the premise. Just the
No, but the
premise.
premise is, yes, there's an enormous difference. Because, and this is the point this gentleman made, the point is that you learn to be you learn to be whatever you're going to be from those role models. So if I go into a situation and I use the story about reading, if reading is something us guys do, I'm going to be a reader. Because I'm one of the guys, right? If truanting from school is something us guys do, I'm going to be a truant, probably, unless I got real moral fiber, which I don't. So I talked to parents through the West. One parent came up and said her son wouldn't do his homework because the boys he hung around with at school didn't do theirs. And for him to hand it in excluded him from the group he wanted to belong to. So have I got a miracle solution? Yeah, sure I have. Tell him to hand his homework in before school starts or after school ends so the kids don't see him do it. But the fact of it is, if he hands it in and they see him, he's now excluded. Well, that's a social reality. I'm not saying that's the way it should be. Don't misunderstand me. I don't say it's the way it should be. But you know what it is. And we have schools, particularly you see them more in the States than you do here, but you have schools here too, where the reality is none of the boys will do it because you know what's the burden of being a boy. If I want to be one of the guys, I've got to do what the guys do. And if what the guys do is they don't do their homework, then I don't do mine. Because I want to be one of the guys. It's a dilemma we have, and yes, there's a lot of hard data to support it.
Okay, looks like we have time for about 2 more questions, as we do end at 9 o'clock. So we'll take your question.
Yes, this is a great topic, very important. One of the things you talked about was the knowledge-based economy. And I've heard this a lot, we're heading more and more towards a knowledge-based economy. And when it comes to boys, not a lot of boys, not all, but there's going to be a significant chunk of boys that couldn't care less about a knowledge-based economy. Having a knowledge-based job aren't meant for that. And in the olden days, they could build a house with their own 2 hands, and now they're being told you can't have that house, that life that you could build with your own 2 hands because you're not getting an education in the knowledge-based economy, so you can't have what you're perfectly capable of doing all by yourself. Does this make sense to that?
No,
I'm not knocking on this. This is important. But I'm just saying there's a whole
I
chunk of
understand
other
what you're
boys
saying, but here's the
that are not
reality.
meant for that.
The reality is.
I know the reality.
Yeah, the reality is if I'm working in, and I can go down the list of professions, I am now recession-proof. You can have all the recessions you want, folks. I've got a well-paying job. I've got a pension that's gold-plated. I've got every benefit going, and I'm not ever going to be paid off.
Yeah, I agree with that. And if you're meant for that, that's what you want to pursue.
No, excuse me. Excuse me, meant for that. I have a little trouble with that one. Because the reality is, when I was born, I wasn't meant for anything. I was meant for everything.
Yeah, but some guys
And I get shaped by that.
Hands. They want to build with their hands.
That's fine.
That's what they're meant for.
There's not a problem with that. There's not a problem with that at all.
Well, there is a problem because they can't have it. They can't use their hands to build their house. They can't. They're being told they have to pursue this angle.
No, they can, for example, pursue, because nothing in the knowledge-based economy says I can't use my hands.
Wow.
I have to use my head too. That's the
I
point.
think there's a lot of guys who feel like,
well, if there are no
I don't
jobs,
even agree, but I could make my own living if I was just allowed to build my own house and have a good life. But those type of people are now being pushed aside in favor for the people who are just more knowledge-based. Both should have opportunities, what I'm saying.
Well, the reality is if there's work for you to do, go out and build your house.
It doesn't work like that so much anymore.
No, that's the point.
Yeah.
And so I can say I want to be a subsistence farmer and work on a 100-acre farm. And then I go to Saskatchewan, or Alberta, it's Alberta actually, and it's like 5,000-acre farms. Now, what hope have you got with a 100-acre farm when some guy's running a 5,000-acre farm?
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to be a farmer.
No, but I'm saying, if I'm going to build this house by myself, a craftsman and so on.
My grandpa built my house that I grew up in.
My father built the one I grew up in too. But the point is, today, I'm going to build that house, And Peterborough Homes is gonna build the one next to me in 6 weeks. This is gonna take me a year. So the reality is, I can't compete in that anymore. I just can't. I can get a job working for Peterborough Homes perhaps, but when the economy goes sour, people aren't buying homes. So guess what? Who's first to get laid off?
Yeah, I know all this, I know.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Oh, no, I understand, but this is the reality of the world
We
we're
need
in.
programs for boys who don't want to necessarily pursue a knowledge-based degree, don't want to become a lawyer, because not
No.
everybody can be a lawyer, not
No.
everybody can be an accountant, that's the top of the hierarchy.
Yeah.
What are you saying for all the people at the bottom of the hierarchy, all those boys?
I'm saying the reality is the number of jobs that you could do without post-secondary education is doing this.
Yeah, I know, but it doesn't have to be like that.
Well, okay, good luck.
I know, and I'm saying that's a problem, and I think we
Yeah.
should address that.
Okay.
Okay, final question, sir?
Yes.
Can I speak?
Yeah.
Okay, you described some changes in the educational system policy that took place around the late 60s and early 70s,
Yeah.
and then drew some correlations between those policy changes and what you've talked about tonight. My question is, can you think of any other policy change that took place in the education system around that time that might also bear some relevance on those changes that you talked about?
Probably, but it's kind of difficult, but because I came prepared to talk about this. But yeah, there were a lot of changes that took place in the education system through the 70s and 80s. But I wasn't talking so much about changes in the education system as I was in terms of changing in terms of staffing in the education system and the impact that's had. You know, we went from a school system where 5% of people finished grade routine. We're fewer than 50% of people, less than 50% of people graduated from high school. That's not all that long ago. And now we have over 50% of people with post-secondary education. Over 50. This country has the highest percentage of people in post-secondary education in the world. And so, I mean, you know, so you want changes. Yeah, there's been a ton of changes that have taken place in terms of education and so on. Where we had a system that sifted and sorted people and found a way to say, okay, we'll just pick out the elite and they'll get post-secondary education the rest won't. We've changed all that. For better or worse, that's, you know, I mean, obviously the more we learn, the better off I think we are. But my focus has been on what impact is that, social impact does that have on boys or girls? What did it have on girls first and now on boys? As we change the dynamic of, or the culture of the school. So it used to be you went into a secondary school that was almost all men teachers. Now you go to a secondary school, I guarantee you, the majority of secondary school teachers are women. So boys who survived the elementary system, if you like, got into secondary school, went into a male-dominated milieu. Not like that anymore. It's not like that anymore. And that is a factor. That is a social factor that affects people. I'm not talking about how they're teaching or not teaching. I mean, I talked to you a lot about teaching and things that needed change there too. But this is part of a social issue because that's something we're dealing with as parents. And if my son is going to be turned off because he doesn't have a same-sex, my son may not have a same-sex parent at home if it's a single-parent family. So I say to his mom, send him to scouts. Guess what? Scouts are co-ed. And co-ed scout troops have to have a woman leader. I don't think that. I know that. They have to have a woman leader. So that's changed. So now there's no longer a male sample form in terms of the scouting. We don't have boys clubs and girls clubs anymore. We have boys and girls clubs. And I guarantee you, if you have a boys and girls club, you have to have female leaders there because men are all, we all know men are all.
Do we have male leaders in girls programs these days?
No, you see, because the notwithstanding clause in the Constitution allows the government to say this activity can be girls only. this activity cannot be boys only. That decision was made by the Supreme Court on the basis of using the notwithstanding clause. It's in the Constitution. You look it up online, you can find it. Yeah.
That's new to me.
No, it's a reality. So you can have clubs. See, we can have activity. We can have girl guides for girls only. So we have girl guides for girls only, and we have scouts for boys and girls. And in the UK, there are now more girls in scouts than there are boys. Girl guides have 5 times as many as the scouts have. But the scouts are mostly girls.
My understanding of the use of the notwithstanding clause is something quite different. I'm very interested in finding out if that.
No, have a look, because it has been used to say this is discriminatory. However, notwithstanding the fact that it's discriminatory, we're allowing it. Sorry.
Just wrap.
Okay, thank you.
You could join me in thanking Dr.